Welcome back to Furniture Industry News, your go-to source for staying up to date with what's happening in the furniture world. It's Friday, April 11th, 2025, and as always, we're here to break down the biggest headlines and trends impacting the industry, from market shifts to trade talk and corporate moves. Let's kick things off today with some fresh insights into what's driving consumer interest, specifically when it comes to dining furniture. According to the latest findings from Consumer Insights Now, about 21% of consumers say they're planning to buy dining furniture sometime in the next year. That's a pretty solid number, but the real story is who's doing the buying and what they're looking for. Most of the interest is coming from younger shoppers, those under the age of 44, and they're especially drawn to casual dining sets that come in under that $1,000 price point. That says a lot about where the demand is going. These aren't folks hunting for big, formal dining room setups. They want functionality, affordability, and style that fits a more casual, possibly smaller living space. And here's something else that jumped out. About a third of these buyers have recently bought a home, and another 40% say they plan to buy one soon. That connection between new homeownership and furniture buying? Still going strong. So for retailers and manufacturers, if you're not targeting new homeowners yet, it might be time to think about how your marketing and product lines can speak to that life transition. But while some consumers are ready to spend, we've got to talk about the other side of the coin, consumer sentiment. According to the latest numbers, confidence levels have taken a noticeable dip. Blame it on the chatter around trade wars, rising inflation, or that roller coaster stock market. Whatever the reason, people are feeling more cautious, and that kind of mood can definitely cool down furniture purchases. Now, what does that mean for the folks on the manufacturing side? Well, agility is the name of the game right now, especially in upholstery. One industry executive recently summed it up by saying, "It's a 10-day strategy now, not a 10-year plan." That's not just a catchy line. It really reflects how quickly things can shift these days. Whether it's consumer tastes, supply chain hiccups, or geopolitical curveballs, manufacturers need to stay nimble. Instead of locking into long-term programs, there's a growing focus on short runs, fast turnarounds, and being able to pivot quickly when demand shifts. It's not about massive inventories anymore. It's about flexibility and speed. If you're in upholstery and still thinking in terms of long timelines, now might be the moment to reassess that approach. And speaking of challenges, let's move over to trade and tariffs because there's been a lot happening there this week. The American Home Furnishings Alliance, or AHFA, is stepping up in a big way. They're leading a coalition of U.S. furniture companies fighting back against proposed tariffs on certain types of lumber. The AHFA argues that these tariffs are not only unlawful, but would also put serious strain on domestic manufacturers by driving up costs and creating more supply issues. Lumber tariffs might sound like a niche concern, but for furniture makers, especially those committed to U.S.-based production, it's a huge deal. Anything that disrupts the flow or price of raw materials puts pressure on everything from pricing to production timelines. AHFA is taking a strong stance here, and it's worth watching to see how this plays out with federal regulators. At the same time, there's some positive movement on the trade front. The U.S. Trade Representative has walked back a proposal to add fees to ships built in China. Why does that matter to us in the furniture world? Because those ships are a key piece of how goods get from point A to point B in the global supply chain. New fees would have increased the cost of transporting products, and that's a cost that often gets passed down the line. So while this isn't a direct furniture tariff, it could have had a ripple effect. For now, it looks like cooler heads have prevailed. Meanwhile, in the business world, there's a new acquisition making waves. Linen Home Decor has officially acquired Coast to Coast, and they've got big plans to relaunch the brand at the upcoming High Point market. Linen says this move will help expand their offerings and strengthen their footprint in key categories. Coast to Coast had been relatively quiet for a while, so bringing it back into the spotlight could spark some fresh attention at market. These kinds of brand moves can be tricky, but when done right, they create opportunities for retailers to refresh their floors with something that's both familiar and new. If you're attending High Point, keep an eye out for how Linen reintroduces the brand, especially in terms of merchandising and product positioning. Now let's check in with Lovesac. They're wrapping up what they're calling a milestone year. Sales are strong, and the company is making a strategic pivot by reducing its dependence on Chinese manufacturing. That's a big shift for a brand that, like many others, has long relied on China for cost-effective production. Lovesac is exploring sourcing options elsewhere, and part of that effort includes nearshoring, bringing some of that production closer to the U.S. This isn't just about politics, it's about resilience. Having a more diverse supply chain could help protect the company from unexpected disruptions, whether it's tariffs, shipping delays, or other external pressures. Definitely something more furniture brands may start seriously considering. And finally today, let's talk about RH, formerly known as Restoration Hardware. They just released their quarterly earnings and, well, the numbers didn't quite meet expectations. But despite the miss, leadership says they're confident about weathering what's ahead. What's their strategy? For one, they're leaning into their deep inventory, which they say positions them well for any future supply challenges. They're also sticking to a long-term vision, even if the short term gets a little rocky. That's not a bad mindset in today's environment. We're all navigating some economic headwinds, and being prepared to stay the course while making smart adjustments is key. So whether you're on the retail floor, managing a manufacturing operation, or keeping an eye on corporate strategy, there's a lot going on right now that deserves your attention. Consumers are still buying, but more carefully. Manufacturers are focusing on speed and flexibility. Tariffs and trade are shaking things up behind the scenes, and brands are making bold moves to stay competitive. That's going to wrap it up for today's episode of Furniture Industry News. If you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an update. We'll be back soon with more stories that matter to you and your business. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.